Hi everyone. In the last video, we talked about the resistance to oppression. So we had a vehicle, we were in a vehicle, and that vehicle was being pushed off the road. And I think we could see clearer now from that video and what I talked about the ever-present nature of resistance and how the executed resistance to the things that are happening to us, the oppression, the violence, is circumstantial to the present dangers and opportunities of any given situation. So the car was being pushed off the road. We talked about all the different resistance things that we could have done. And so that kind of shows that it is always present. So close analysis of social interactions like this take into account the social and material context. In other words, the conditions around that. This is essential. It's an essential starting point to having any type of effective intervention to know what happened. So the social responses, in other words, responses around us, are critical. So people who have been victimized and people who are doing the harm are constantly mindful of actual and possible social network responses and also institutional responses. So we want to keep that in mind as we go on. So the quality of social responses in cases of interpersonal violence or interactions between people is closely tied to, number one, the victim's responses and resistance, the offender's strategies, also in the short and long-term outcomes of interactions of violence. So one of the examples I wanted to use brings in a new aspect, and that's called interpersonal. So the other one, we were in a vehicle, someone was pushing off the road. This, we want to show it in an interpersonal interaction, basically between two people. It can be two groups of people. It can be, different scenarios. It could be a woman and her children with a husband. It could be, in this scenario, we're going to use something else. So I want to show that violence or violating someone's personhood and what they want, their will and well-being, is a deliberate action. And I want to do that by showing the two different kinds of interactions and talking about the differences. The two kinds of interpersonal interactions, or things that are personal, between two people, okay? That there is mutual interactions and there are unilateral actions, okay? In the unilateral, we say actions and not interactions because you'll see that mutual is between the two people. But when we go to a unilateral, it's the action of one person against the will and well-being of the other. So a mutual interaction is where two people agree or consent to the interaction, and the unilateral interaction or action against is where one person does something against the will and well-being. So say you're taking a walk in the park, and a person, we'll say a man, walks up and asks you for money. Then you get to evaluate the situation. You may think, we're on equal terms. This man might need money, and I have the opportunity to fill that need or not that need. So you might think to yourself, oh, let me ask him a couple more questions about what the money's needed for. I really don't like to give people money, without any reason. So you might ask some questions, and at the end, you can make your decision by a thought process or however you want to do it. You have a mutual consent, a mutual way. So if you agree to give the money to the person, then this is an interaction that would be considered mutual. He asked, you had an opportunity to say yes and no. You had the opportunity to agree or disagree, and you had the opportunity to consent or to reject this request. This is a mutual interaction where two people are kind of on equal playing field. But let's say that as he walks up and asks for money, you decide to say, no, I'm really not interested in giving you money today. And, maybe there's an interchange. But what happens then if he pulls out a knife and threatens you? Threatens to harm you, threatens to kill you, threatens however, if you don't give him money. He has now hijacked what could have been considered a mutual exchange, interaction between two people, And now it's a unilateral action whereby he is going against what you've just stated as your desire. So you see how that changes. You are now under threat, you're under coercion, and he is choosing to do something that you just said no. So it is basically against your will. We could see how this can play out in a romantic or relationship between two people, but we're using this generic one just to show less personable, but to show how this comes about. So you've made it clear that your choice is not to give the money to this man, and he chooses to change what seemed to start as a mutual interaction and the exchange of money from you to him into a unilateral, forceful act of violating you, of taking something against your will. So we call that a violent action. We sometimes think of a violent action as, something that someone's hitting or assaulting, but they are assaulting in a way because they're taking something that isn't there. So it's considered violence. In where he no longer is doing something with you, but he's doing something against you. And since he's directly going against your will and your well-being, you're a little bit distressed. You told them no, it's your money, you worked for it, or however, you didn't want to give it. This becomes not only violating you, so violent, but it becomes unilateral in nature now. So it's a violent, unilateral, him choosing to do something under duress interaction. You did not turn this exchange into this unilateral violent action. He did. So this person is fully responsible for what they're doing. If this encounter were later described to the police, we would not describe this as a mutual act of exchanging money that got out of hand, because you didn't get out of hand. You just said, no, I don't want to go and give you money. And then this person went against your will or your well-being. So if we did describe this transpired in the exchange of money that got out of hand, it would mean that you both got out of hand, but you didn't. So you were just trying to take a stroll in the park, and this person came up and decided to do something against you. So I think you could see that if we're aware of where to focus, and if we focus on the difference between what is a mutual interaction and what is a unilateral action against someone, it makes a big difference in how it is represented. We could see who did what to whom, who is responsible, and this way you get a much more accurate description. You're not the least bit confused about what happened. And do you think this person who violated you was confused about what they were doing? Because now they went from not getting what they wanted, and now they became a robber. So do you think they're confused about that? No. He knows exactly when he made that decision to turn what could have been a mutual interaction that you said no to. It could have stayed mutual, it could have stayed equal, it could have stayed consensual, and he could have left, but he didn't. He turned it into a unilateral, something he did against the will and well-being of you. So it's a unilateral violent action. The Center for Response-Based, which I quote a lot, Alan Wade, says, violent behavior is most accurately understood when it is examined in context, so in the condition. That is when we consider both the offender's actions and the victim's immediate responses to those actions. It becomes apparent that the perpetrators anticipate certain responses by victims, and they modify their actions or other responses that do or do not occur. So think about this action. He went up, there was something that occurred, he had already anticipated. How do we know that? Because the knife was in the pocket, and as soon as we disagreed, the knife came out, and that person was then doing something against our well-being. So even in the park, even in this situation, his actions were determined on what or what did not happen at that time. They would have been determined on the social things around them. the social environment, who was around, who was in the park, all of that would have had to been figured out before he chose to do that action. So there was a lot of deliberation going in there, but that was strategy he had, but we had to use tactical skills to resist that because we were caught off guard because we thought we were going to have a mutual transaction or interaction. So resistance can be anything spiritual, emotional, physical, or psychological. And it also includes anything mental or behavioral, any act of mental or behavioral in which a person attempts to oppose what's happening, withstand, repel, stop, prevent, abstain from, strive against, impede, or refuse to comply with any form of violence or oppression. All of these things are forms of forms of resistance. By using more accurate language to describe these things, to describe what's happening, to describe how this person violated, the extent of what the person did, I guess you could call it the deliberateness or the brutality, is clearer, and the offender is rightly placed in a position of being fully responsible. Keeping mutual language exclusively for mutual social interactions also redefines a relationship as something that exists in equality. So again, when it was mutual, we were equal, he didn't have a weapon, there was no coercion, we could make that decision with consent. And so we have to realize that mutual interactions are always in a standard of equality. So I hope that helps, and I hope that adds to the video I did the other day. Have a good day. Bye-bye.